Welcome to the Podkey summary of castles in Great Britain and Ireland. Castles start out in this story as engines of conquest and control, and they stay surprisingly adaptable for a very long time. They were military tools, administrative hubs, status symbols, giant hospitality machines, and eventually heritage sites that tell us as much about modern taste as medieval war. And one of the big takeaways here is that the meaning of a castle keeps changing, depending on who built it, where it stood, and what kind of power it was meant to project. After the Norman Conquest, castle building arrives at scale as a way to hold down territory fast. These weren't just forts dropped into the landscape. They controlled towns, roads, forests, estates, and newly occupied areas, and they made the new regime impossible to miss. Sometimes that visibility was brutally literal. Building urban castles could mean clearing out local homes, including 166 in Lincoln, 113 in Norwich, and 27 in Cambridge. So the castle was doing two jobs at once. It was a military installation, and it was a public statement that power had changed hands. Royal castles and baronial castles overlapped, but they weren't quite the same thing. Royal sites backed sheriffs, prisons, administration, and the extraction of resources, while baronial strongholds helped lords run estates and hold local courts. In Scotland, David I used Anglo-Norman settlers in castles too, but less as a simple conquest weapon and more as part of building a new system of government. If you picture medieval warfare as one huge battle after another, castles complicate that picture. During the Anarchy, from 1139 to 1153, castles became the main targets, and war often looked like raids, sieges, and the hurried building of temporary fortifications. Contemporaries claimed 1,011 in castles went up during that conflict, which is probably inflated. Modern regional studies suggest plenty were short-lived, improvised, or later abandoned. That actually fits the moment pretty well. A lot of medieval war was less about one dramatic clash and more about grinding pressure on strong points. Castle design kept evolving because siege technology kept getting better. The trebuchet pushed builders toward curved walls and polygonal towers that handled impact better, while arrow slits, machicolations, crossbows, and more elaborate gatehouses made attackers work harder and longer. And longer meant expensive. The siege of Rochester reportedly cost King John around 60,000 marks, which gives you a sense of how resource-hungry these operations could become. When Henry III took Bedford Castle in 1224, it wasn't a matter of showing up with determination and good vibes. He had to mobilize engineers, laborers, equipment, and supplies from across England. Gunpowder matters, but it doesn't instantly erase the castle. Early cannons were unreliable, and they could be more useful for defending walls or disrupting siege crews than for smashing through stone. Artillery became truly decisive when rulers could move enough of it, in enough weight, to the right place. Cromwell's heavy siege train in Ireland in 1649 is the kind of moment when the defensive usefulness of many castles falls away very quickly. By the 16th century, the cutting edge had shifted toward purpose-built artillery forts rather than traditional domestic castles. Henry VIII's device forts used compact lobed plans with overlapping fire, and in Scotland sites like Ravenscraig adopted low-curved gun platforms earlier than most English castles. At the same time, castles were becoming more comfortable, more theatrical, and much more obviously elite homes. By the 14th century, you see painted interiors, tapestries, glazed windows, private chambers, gardens, ponds, parks, and landscapes arranged to impress. Places like Goodrich and Bolton were redesigned to house multiple noble households, which tells you these were social machines as much as military ones. Bodiam is the classic case for the debate. It looks exactly like what many people think a storybook castle should look like, with its moat, towers, and gun ports. But the design was primarily suited to luxurious domestic life and status display, rather than holding out against a serious organized assault. And the hospitality could get enormous. Around 2,000 people attended a feast at Cawood Castle in 1466. and Elizabeth I's 19-day visit to Kenilworth in 1575 involved 31 barons and 400 staff. At that point, you're not just defending a household, you're hosting a traveling political universe. One really important correction to the usual castle picture is that there wasn't one single British Isles model. Wales and Ireland often followed English architectural patterns, but Scotland moved strongly toward smaller tower houses after Alexander III. Eventually, more than 3,000 tower houses were built in Ireland, compared with about 800 in Scotland and over 250 in England. Scottish tower houses reflected both insecurity and prosperity. They could protect against raids and clan conflict, while also acting as status symbols for lesser lords during economic growth. Their defenses were usually good enough against small raiding parties, not major artillery warfare. Native Welsh princes built castles too, often taking advantage of mountainous terrain and irregular rock formations. Indigenous Irish lords, though, built relatively few castles despite long conflict with the Anglo-Normans, and that has fueled a long debate about how far local societies adopted European castle technology. Even after their medieval peak, castles kept turning up in military life. During the English Civil War, around 150 fortifications were slighted between 1646 and 1651, but plenty of castles were also renovated, backed with earth, turned into gun platforms, or used as headquarters, prisons, and control points over the surrounding countryside. Their decline was gradual, not a trapdoor moment. Carlisle and Stirling still mattered in the Jacobite Rising of 1745. Some became barracks or prisoner of war facilities, and Dover Castle even served as a nuclear war command center into the 1950s, which is a pretty wild career change for a medieval fortress. Others became county jails, though 19th century prison reform exposed just how poor many of those conditions were. From the 18th century on, ruined castles picked up a whole new kind of value as picturesque landscapes, tourist attractions, and national symbols. Gothic Revival owners repaired them or romanticized them on purpose, and replica castles like Penrhyn, Castell Coch, and Castle Drogo blurred the line between medieval survival and modern fantasy. Tourism became huge. In 2018, the Tower of London drew nearly 2.9 million visitors, and Edinburgh Castle drew 2.1 million. Modern preservation is messy, because every choice carries an argument inside it. Owners have to balance repair, access, archaeology, commercial pressure, and the temptation to create an appearance that feels authentic, even if it never really existed. The debate over the £37 million restoration after the 1992 fire at Windsor Castle showed just how national those choices can become. And in scholarship, castles aren't seen only as defensive machines anymore. Historians now look just as hard at symbolism, landscape, administration, and social life. That revisionist debate around places like Bodiam is part of the bigger shift. Sometimes the military look of a castle is doing political and cultural work as much as practical defensive work. So the castle turns out to be a lot more than walls and battlements. It's a way of reading conquest, government, technology, hospitality, memory, and the stories later generations wanted to tell about all of it. Which is probably why castles keep hanging around in the imagination long after they stop being the newest thing in military architecture. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.